April 14, 2026, 11:22 p.m. local time. The Gulf of Oman, 41 miles southwest of the Iranian port of Jask. The USS Bataan moves through the night at 17 knots, her silhouette dark against the water. She is 844 feet long, displacing 40,500 tons, carrying the 26th Marine Expeditionary Unit, 2,200 Marines who can deploy anywhere in the world within 6 hours. Below her flight deck, AV-8B Harriers and MV-22 Ospreys sit chained and ready. Landing craft fill her well deck. On the bridge, navigation displays and radar returns cast the night watch in cool blue light. She is not alone. USS Cole, an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer, rides 12 miles off the Bataan's port side. USS Bulkeley holds station to starboard, 9 miles out. Together, the three ships form Amphibious Ready Group Bravo, operating in one of the most contested waterways on Earth. The air smells of salt and diesel. 2-foot swells, a light northwesterly breeze, visibility 8 miles. Good conditions for a transit. Also, good conditions for a missile attack. I'm your host at Navy Powerline, where we break down critical naval operations. Tonight, we're reconstructing a missile engagement the Pentagon is still quietly analyzing. 14 Iranian anti-ship cruise missiles launched in 2 coordinated waves, a saturation attack designed to overwhelm a ship's air defense network. Every second of what followed was captured in Aegis combat system logs. Every decision was reviewed in the after-action report submitted to 5th Fleet Headquarters in Manama. Declassified portions of that review, combined with communications intercepts and satellite imagery, give us a minute-by-minute picture of what happened the night Iran tried to sink a United States warship. This is that story. To understand the attack, you need to understand the pressure that preceded it. March 2026. The United States Fifth Fleet tightened its interdiction operations across the Gulf of Oman. U.S. Navy boarding teams, operating under a UN Security Council authorization that Iran refused to recognize, were stopping and searching tankers suspected of carrying Iranian crude in violation of expanded international sanctions. The blockade was strangling the Iranian economy. Oil revenues had dropped 60% in 8 weeks. Unemployment inside Iran was pushing toward 40%. The supreme leader was under pressure from hardliners inside the IRGC, men who believed one decisive strike could force Washington to back down, force a renegotiation, prove that the Strait of Hormuz and the Gulf of Oman were not American lakes. They were wrong about a great many things that night, but they were most wrong about that. The IRGC Navy had been watching American movements in the Gulf of Oman for weeks. Intelligence analysts at the Jask Coastal Defense Battery had built what they believed was a complete picture of Fifth Fleet patrol patterns. The Bataan, her escorts, transit routes, times on station, all carefully tracked. The Jask battery had been upgraded in late 2025 with additional Noor and Qader anti-ship cruise missiles. The IRGC commanders had run the numbers and simulated the engagement. On paper, 14 missiles in 2 carefully timed waves against a single amphibious group looked viable. What those commanders didn't know was that they were being watched back. Satellite imagery and signals intelligence had been flowing into 5th Fleet Headquarters for 72 hours before April 14th. Transport vehicles had moved to the Jask battery. Missile launchers were being repositioned. Thermal imaging showed launcher vehicles shifting from hardened shelters to forward firing positions. Fuel trucks had serviced the site through the day. Intercepts picked up elevated radio traffic between the battery and IRGC Navy headquarters in Bandar Abbas. By early afternoon on April 14th, the threat assessment at 5th Fleet was elevated to WatchCon 2. The Bataan and her group were notified. Captain Marcus Webb, commanding officer of the Bataan, held a brief with his department heads at 3:30 p.m. The message was simple. There's a credible threat from Jask. We don't alter course. We increase readiness. we trust the system. That system had been in motion for hours before Webb's brief. I went through the after-action assessments from this engagement, and one detail kept standing out: how far American commanders had already gone in preparing their response before the first Iranian missile was ever armed. At exactly 9:47 p.m., an EA-18G Growler from Electronic Attack Squadron VFA-87 launched from the deck of USS Theodore Roosevelt, operating 280 miles to the south in the Arabian Sea. The mission: transit to a loiter position 80 miles south of the Jask battery and begin passive surveillance of Iranian fire control radar emissions. No jamming. Not yet. Listen, characterize, wait. The Growler carries no air-to-air missiles. What it carries is an advanced electronic warfare suite, the AN/ALQ-99 jamming system, and the next-generation ALQ-218 wideband receiver. Flying at 38,000 feet in the dark, invisible to the battery below, it became a silent electronic sentinel above the Gulf of Oman. The crew, pilot Lieutenant Commander Sarah Yates and Electronic Countermeasures Officer Lieutenant Marcus Chen, watched Iranian radar emissions scroll across their displays. The Jask battery was painting the sea below, running acquisition sweeps across the formation it had spent weeks tracking. Aboard the Bataan, the Combat Information Center was running hot. Petty officers at consoles tracked surface contacts, air contacts, the electronic signature of the Jask battery. The Tactical Action Officer, Commander David Reyes, 14 years of surface warfare experience, watched his displays with the attention of someone who has spent years learning to read a tense ocean. At 11:09 p.m., the Jask battery's fire control radar changed its emission pattern. Instead of a broad surveillance sweep, it shifted to a narrow, high-intensity targeting mode. The pulse characteristics changed. The frequency hopped to an acquisition band. Reyes read it immediately. Bataan, Cole. Jask fire control radar has gone to targeting mode. I am seeing weapon release indicators. USS Bulkeley's Tactical Action Officer confirmed 11 seconds later. Bataan, Bulkeley concurs. Jask is going active targeting. Recommend General Quarters. General Quarters sounded across all three ships at 11:10 p.m. In the civilian world, an alarm means you acknowledge it and move deliberately toward a response. In the United States Navy, General Quarters means every sailor runs. Every sailor has a battle station they have drilled for hundreds of times. Watertight doors slam shut along the length of the ship in a cascade of steel on steel. Damage control teams seal access hatches. Weapons stations light up. Fire control systems shift from standby to fully active. The Bataan went from a ship conducting a routine transit to a warship ready for close-in combat in under 3 minutes. On USS Cole, the Aegis weapons system came fully online. The Aegis Combat System's SPY-1D phased array radar scans a volume of airspace measuring 200 nautical miles in every direction and 100,000 feet in altitude simultaneously. It tracks 200 separate contacts at once, each with its own threat classification, velocity vector, predicted intercept point, and assigned response. It processes more radar returns per second than an entire Cold War-era air defense center could handle in an hour. It doesn't get distracted, it doesn't hesitate, it doesn't panic. In April 2026, standing between 14 anti-ship missiles and the USS Bataan, it was about to show exactly what that means. At 11:22 p.m. and 40 seconds, the EA-18G Growler crew transmitted a single encrypted burst to the formation. Jask launch. Multiple contacts outbound. Tracking 14 tracks. First wave, 8 birds. Second wave, 6 birds. Estimated T plus 90 seconds. 14 cruise missiles had just left their launchers. The Noor and Qader are Iran's primary anti-ship cruise missiles, modified derivatives of the Chinese C-802 design, upgraded through Iranian reverse engineering and indigenous development. The Noor carries a 165-kilogram-shaped charge warhead capable of penetrating the hull of a destroyer or starting catastrophic fires aboard an amphibious assault ship. It flies at sea-skimming altitude of 5 to 7 meters above the wave tops, below most radar horizon geometries. At terminal approach, it pops up briefly to acquire the target and then dives. It travels at approximately 600 miles per hour, designed to arrive before a ship's close-in defenses can fully respond. The first wave, 8 missiles, launched in a spread pattern from multiple positions at Jask, timed to arrive from different bearings and simultaneously overload a single air defense sector. The second wave, 6 additional missiles, arriving exactly 90 seconds after the first, timed specifically to hit during the window when a defending ship's fire control team would be stretched thin, its magazine partially depleted, its systems cycling through reloads. This is Iranian saturation doctrine. The theory is mathematically sound. Even a capable air defense system can only engage a finite number of simultaneous targets. Overwhelm it with inbound threats from multiple directions, and the arithmetic turns against the defender. The IRGC commanders had run this simulation dozens of times. They were confident. They had built that confidence on 2 assumptions. Both were wrong. Here's what the Jask battery commanders did not know. 31 seconds before the first Noor crossed the Iranian coastline, Lieutenant Commander Yates keyed her jamming system. The ALQ-99 generates a precisely tuned wall of electromagnetic interference targeting the specific frequency bands used by the Noor and Qader mid-course guidance systems. Iranian cruise missiles of this generation use a combination of inertial navigation for the flight phase and active radar homing for the terminal run. Disrupt the active radar seeker at mid-course, and the missile loses the ability to refine its flight path against a moving target. It continues flying on inertial guidance alone, which cannot account for the Bataan having changed course or speed, which cannot compensate for the normal drift in a ship's position over a 15-minute flight. The first wave of 8 missiles never achieved radar lock on the USS Bataan. 3 missiles, flying on inertial guidance only, followed flight paths that carried them north of the formation. 2 curved south. 3 maintained roughly correct headings, close enough that Aegis designated them active threats, but without the terminal radar lock that would have guided them to the ship's waterline. Those 3 were the immediate problem. The Aegis system on USS Cole had designated all 8 tracks hostile the moment they cleared the Iranian coastline. SM-2 Block IIIC interceptors were queued against each threat. The SM-2 is 15 feet long, 1,350 pounds, and accelerates to Mach 3.5 within seconds of leaving its launch cell. Its continuous rod warhead, a ring of dense tungsten fragments, detonates at proximity range and shreds the aerodynamic surfaces of a target missile. At the velocities involved, the engagement is over in milliseconds. USS Cole fired 6 SM-2s in 9 seconds. The fire control solutions were clean. Each interceptor found its designated track. The 3 Noors maintaining a threat vector toward the formation were destroyed at distances ranging from 14 to 22 nautical miles from the Bataan. Secondary detonations from the Noor warheads were visible from the bridge. Brief orange flashes low on the horizon, gone before most sailors could process what they were seeing. The 5 remaining first-wave missiles, flying off course from the Growler's jamming, were allowed to pass. They impacted the surface of the Gulf of Oman between 4 and 11 miles from the nearest ship. First wave, 8 launched, 8 neutralized, 0 hits. The Bataan's crew had 90 seconds before the second wave arrived. The SM-2 magazine on USS Cole had just expended 6 rounds. The vertical launch system was already cycling. Automated systems raising new rounds from below-deck magazines through launch cells in a sequence taking approximately 3 seconds per cell. The math was changing. The second wave of 6 Qader missiles approached from the southeast. a different axis than the first wave's northwest approach. The Qader's seeker had been partially affected by the Growler's jamming, but the second wave had launched on a compressed timeline, and several missiles had acquired partial radar lock before the jamming fully degraded their guidance. 4 of the 6 second-wave Qadrs were genuine impact threats. USS Bulkeley engaged 3 with SM-2 interceptors at ranges between 18 and 25 nautical miles. All 3 intercepts succeeded. The 4th Qader, which had maintained the strongest radar return and was following the tightest flight path, slipped past Bulkeley's intercept window at a range where the geometry made an SM-2 shot impractical. It was now inside 10 nautical miles of the USS Bataan. And it was not alone. 1 additional Qader from the second wave, tracking erratically but still inbound on a threat bearing, had also closed inside the SM-2 engagement basket. 2 missiles, inside 10 miles, closing at 600 miles per hour. This is where the battle shifted from a long-range chess match to something immediate and visceral. The rolling airframe missile system on the Bataan came online. RAM is the last barrier between a ship and an incoming cruise missile, the final line before steel meets steel. The Block II RAM seeker combines passive radio frequency homing, locking on to the electromagnetic emissions of an incoming missile's own radar seeker with infrared terminal guidance. At close range, against a sea-skimming cruise missile in its terminal approach phase, it works. The Bataan's RAM launcher elevated, acquired both tracks, and fired in rapid sequence. The first Qader was destroyed at 3,400 meters from the Bataan's hull. The detonation of the RAM warhead meeting the Qader's 165-kilogram-shaped charge produced an orange-white fireball, visible from the bridge clearly enough that sailors later described seeing the concussion wave ripple the surface of the sea. The second Qader was destroyed at 2,100 meters. Fragments from both detonations rattled against the Bataan's hull plating. Paint scored, no penetration, no injuries. The shrapnel patterns would later be photographed by damage assessors and noted, almost clinically, as minor cosmetic surface damage. 2 missiles entered the final engagement envelope. Both were destroyed. The chaff clouds deployed automatically when general quarters sounded had handled the remaining 2 second-wave Qadrs, missiles whose guidance had been degraded enough by jamming that they tracked the dense metallic cloud instead of the ship, detonating uselessly in the Gulf of Oman. 14 missiles fired, 0 hits. At 11:35 p.m., Captain Marcus Webb sent a message to 5th Fleet Headquarters in Manama. Bataan actual. Engagement complete. 14 inbound threats neutralized. 0 casualties. 0 structural damage. Awaiting authorization for response. The response authorization took 7 minutes. At 11:42 p.m., the order came down. What's most striking about this engagement isn't the defensive performance. It's how thoroughly the offensive response had already been prepared before the Iranians ever pulled the trigger. 4 FA-18F Super Hornets from Strike Fighter Squadron, FA-87, launched from the Theodore Roosevelt, had been holding on combat air patrol 140 miles south of the Bataan since 10:30 p.m. Armed, fueled, waiting. Their AGM-158C LRASM cruise missiles sat loaded on external pylons, navigation systems already preloaded with target coordinates for the Jask battery's key installations. The long-range anti-ship missile, LRASM, is a 2,200-pound autonomous cruise missile with a range exceeding 200 nautical miles. Its navigation system combines GPS, terrain-following radar, and an onboard targeting computer that uses artificial intelligence to identify specific aim points on a designated target. It can navigate around air defense systems using pre-programmed waypoints. It discriminates between decoys and real targets using multispectral sensors. Multiple LRASMs can communicate with each other to coordinate simultaneous time-on-target attacks, so if one is intercepted, others are already inside the terminal approach phase. The 4 Super Hornets were each carrying 2 LRASMs, 8 missiles inbound toward Jask. The strike package had been assigned specific targets within the battery: fire control radar and its associated power systems, launcher structures, hardened ammunition bunkers, and the command facility at the eastern edge of the compound. At 11:42 p.m. and 30 seconds, 8 LRASMs separated from their pylons and dropped into the night sky above the Gulf of Oman. Here's the take that may generate disagreement. The Iranian decision to execute this strike wasn't a military command calculating risk rationally. It was a political institution under severe domestic pressure, authorizing an attack its own military professionals should have known would fail. The IRGC had access to open-source analysis of Aegis system capabilities. They had satellite imagery of EA-18G Growler operations out of Al-Dhafra. The decision to launch 14 missiles at the Bataan wasn't an intelligence failure. It was a political decision made by men who would never stand on the coastline at Jask, who would watch from hardened command facilities in Bandar Abbas while the crews of that coastal battery bet their lives on a simulation built on a decade-old model of American air defense. That model was obsolete before it was ever run. Aboard the Jask battery in the minutes after launch, things became increasingly chaotic. Intercepts captured later showed confusion about why the fire control radar wasn't reporting missile impact confirmations. The radar was still broadcasting, but the Growler, still orbiting at 38,000 feet 80 miles to the south, had maintained its jamming through the entire engagement. Iranian radar operators were watching their scopes show what should have been a missile strike in progress. They weren't seeing a ship sinking. They were seeing their own radar working. What they couldn't see was that their missiles were flying into electronic darkness, guided only by inertial systems that weren't accurate enough to find a ship that had changed heading twice since the launch coordinates were calculated. The radar emissions from Jask were also painting a target. Radar goes both ways. Broadcast enough energy to track a target, and you announce your own position with precision. The Growler had been cataloging the exact electronic signature of the Jask fire control radar from the moment it arrived on station, the precise frequency, pulse width, pulse repetition rate, and side lobe characteristics, and data linked that signature to the LRASMs before the F/A-18S ever reached their launch coordinates. 3 of the 8 LRASMs were specifically targeted against the fire control radar facility. Their navigation systems treated those emissions as a homing beacon. At 12 a.m. on April 15, 2026, 37 minutes after the Jask battery had fired its first missile, the first LRASM impacted the fire control radar compound. The remaining 7 impacts occurred within the next 91 seconds. Satellite imagery reviewed by analysts at the National Reconnaissance Office the following morning showed 8 distinct impact craters across the Jask coastal battery. The command facility, a reinforced concrete structure that had served as the nerve center of Iranian coastal defense operations along the eastern Gulf of Oman for over a decade, was destroyed. Launcher structures were collapsed. Secondary explosions from the reserve ammunition bunkers burned through the remainder of the night, visible on infrared satellite passes until nearly 4:30 a.m. The fire control radar that had spent weeks carefully plotting the Bataan's position had ceased to exist in any functional sense. The Jask coastal battery fired 14 missiles at United States warships. It did not survive the night. There is a line in the 5th Fleet After Action Review that reads almost like a training manual case study. It notes that the entire defensive engagement, from first missile launch detection to final ram intercept, took 11 minutes and 17 seconds. In those 11 minutes, the combined Aegis systems of USS Cole and USS Bulkeley fired 10 SM-2 interceptors, tracked 14 simultaneous inbound threats, and maintained full fire control capability throughout. The Bataan's ram system fired twice in the terminal phase, automated decoy systems deployed and performed as designed. The EA-18G Growler maintained continuous jamming coverage from first launch to final intercept without a single break in electronic suppression. 0 American casualties, 0 structural damage. Put yourself in the position of the Aegis Tactical Action Officer aboard USS Cole at 11:22 p.m. You have just received confirmation that 14 cruise missiles are inbound. Some are already below your radar horizon because they are flying 7 meters above the wave tops. You have seconds to assign fire control solutions to 8 separate tracks while simultaneously coordinating with 2 other ships, monitoring the Growler's jamming effectiveness in real time, tracking a second wave already 60 seconds behind the first, and preparing for the possibility that some missiles survive to the terminal phase. No panic, just process. This is what years of training and doctrine produce. Not heroes who rise to unforeseen emergencies. Professionals who execute procedures they have rehearsed until those procedures are faster than conscious thought. The Aegis weapons system assigns intercept solutions. The crew's job is to authorize, monitor, and manage the engagements the system has already computed. Cold War tactics, massive salvos designed to overwhelm human operators, don't work against 21st century systems because 21st century systems don't rely on human operators for the fundamental fire control calculations. The IRGC ran a simulation designed to overwhelm a human being. They encountered a machine. In the days following the engagement, the diplomatic fallout moved with predictable speed and predictable futility. Iran's foreign ministry released a statement claiming the Jask battery had been engaged in legitimate defensive operations in response to American aggression in Iranian territorial waters. The statement found little traction. Sources familiar with Iranian internal communications indicated that within 48 hours of the engagement, a significant dispute had emerged between IRGC Naval Command and the political leadership in Tehran over who had authorized the strike and what intelligence assessment had supported it. The Gulf Cooperation Council issued a joint statement affirming the right of American naval forces to defend themselves against unprovoked attack. The United Nations Security Council convened an emergency session. Russia and China vetoed a resolution condemning the American counterstrike. The United States vetoed a resolution demanding a bilateral ceasefire. In Manama, the Fifth Fleet commander submitted an after-action review recommending several adjustments, some classified, to Aegis engagement protocols, specifically regarding the integration timing between Growler electronic warfare support and shipborne fire control systems. The engagement had proven that the combination worked, but the review noted that the outcome had depended on timing precision that required near-perfect execution. Near perfect. That qualifier matters. One detail that stayed with me from the engagement record. The Growler crew began jamming at 31 seconds before the first Noor crossed the coastline. The timing was derived from an estimated launch detection. The moment the Growler's passive receivers identified the change in the Jask radar's emission signature that indicates a fire command has been issued. That estimate was built from months of patient signals intelligence collection on Iranian coastal battery launch procedures. 31 seconds. Enough to blind the first wave. If that estimate had been 20 seconds shorter, if the jamming had begun too late, the first wave of 8 Noor missiles arrives with active radar lock intact. The Aegis system faces 8 actively guided missiles from divergent bearings instead of 3. The math of the engagement shifts. The outcome is not certain in the same way it was certain on the night of April 14th. The system worked. The training worked. The doctrine worked. But there is no engagement in air defense where the margins are comfortable. The distance between 14 missiles intercepted and a catastrophic strike on a ship carrying 2,200 United States Marines was measured, in part, in 31 seconds, and the judgment of 2 crew members in an electronic warfare aircraft operating alone above the Gulf of Oman at midnight. They made the right call. They made it at the right time. Will Iran attempt another coordinated strike against a Fifth Fleet asset in the next 12 months? Drop yes or no in the comments, because the answer depends on something the after-action review doesn't address directly. Whether the destruction of the Jask battery was painful enough to recalibrate IRGC doctrine, or whether it simply drove the problem to a different stretch of coastline and a different battery that has been watching, and waiting, and building a new simulation. Fifth Fleet extended its electronic warfare coverage across the northern Gulf of Oman within 72 hours. A second Growler detachment was forward deployed to Al Dhafra Air Base in the UAE. The Bataan completed her transit through the Strait of Hormuz 4 days later, on April 18, 2026, passing within 30 miles of the Iranian coast. The 26th MEU, fully embarked and fully combat-ready. No Iranian naval assets challenged the passage. No fire control radars painted the formation. The message was deliberate, and it was received. The Jask coastal battery attacked a United States warship and achieved nothing. The attack was defeated at every layer: electronic warfare, long-range intercept, medium-range intercept, close-in defense, automated decoy systems, a redundant cascade of capability that left 14 Iranian missiles in the sea and the battery in ruins before midnight. The IRGC built a plan to overwhelm American air defenses. They ran their numbers. They believed their doctrine. The doctrine was wrong. The assumptions were wrong. The outcome was never in doubt. Subscribe to Navy Powerline if you want to understand how the United States Navy defends against threats like this, and what happens when those defenses respond. Because on the night of April 14, 2026, 14 missiles were fired at the USS Bataan and her crew. Every single one failed. Before midnight, the battery that fired them was gone. Comment launch. If you think Captain Webb made the right call requesting immediate strike authorization. Or tell us if you think the response should have waited for further diplomatic action. The Gulf of Oman is quieter now than it was before April 14th. That quiet was earned in 11 minutes and 17 seconds by sailors who trained for exactly this and performed exactly as trained. The outcome was never in doubt.